following session, Recovering the Lost Tools of Living, the Common Arts and the Classical Curriculum, will be presented by Mr. Joshua Pauling, who serves as vicar at All Saints Lutheran Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Please welcome Mr. Pauling.
Hello. Let's begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Okay, a few housekeeping items as we get started. If you've been in a presentation of mine before, you know what I'm going to do first. I'm going to tell you to put your phones away. All right, so if you could do me a favor, take your phone out, turn it off, put it on silent, and put it in your bag or under your seat, not on your person or not on your side, preferably. Because when they're on our person and when they're in our sight line, our anxiety goes up and our attention goes down. We're going to try to flip that script. I want your attention to go up. I want your anxiety to go down so we can be fully present with each other for the next hour. There's actually a growing body of research about what's called interruption readiness and interruption potential. In other words, just the potential of an interruption from the phone actually causes brain drain. So just wanted to take care of that. To begin with, I'm going to lead you not into temptation. So thank you for your cooperation with that. A few other housekeeping items as we get started. There's a handout. I think you have it, but there's some on the end if you didn't get one yet. That'll guide our time together. I'm going to sort of do something a little different to start and end. I'm going to sort of bookend our session with a brief reflection and meditation that I've sort of prepared. I'll read those, and then we'll have the body of our presentation in between, which the outline follows. And in that session, in that portion of the session, I really want interaction and questions and comments at any time, really, if it's directly related to what we're talking about, so we can sort of clarify what we're saying, what we're not saying, and provide those nuances. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. All right, so this is the last session. My job is to keep you awake. It's been a great week, lots of good stuff, but I know we're all tired. So keep me awake, and I'll try to keep you awake. So let's begin with a brief reflection. What are hands for? What are hands for? What are hands for in a world where so much is now done with a push of a button or a swipe of a finger? I bumped into this question while gathered around a dinner table to celebrate my eldest daughter's baptismal birthday with her grandparents and godparents. At that table were 8 sets of hands in all. The hands of my 2 daughters, still soft, tender, and growing each day. My wife's hands and mine, in their supposed prime, but perhaps showing hints of decline. Then the hands of grandparents and godparents. Hands that whispered stories from lives fully lived. 2 of those sets were the hands of nurses, expert in touch, sense, and intuition accrued from years of personal hand-to-hand care. The other 2 sets showed the wear of bodily life too. Swollen knuckles from years of grasping rakes and shovels, screwdrivers and wrenches, and noticeable scars only possible from unlucky entanglements with things mechanical. But what are hands for when digitality reigns? When the nurse no longer listens and touches to take a patient's blood pressure, but pushes buttons on a device and watches the screen? When the mechanic no longer discerns and diagnoses car trouble with his own senses, but pushes buttons to connect with the car's ever-growing computer and awaits the solution? Certainly such digital tools are great achievements. They make our lives easier. But when technological layers increasingly mediate our experience of reality, where clicking and swiping become the primary mode of hand use, we creep ever closer to crossing what L.M. Secasas calls a threshold of artificiality, beyond which our capacity to flourish as human beings is diminished. Or as that philosopher-mechanic Matthew Crawford puts it, what atrophies is our natural animal genius for learning about the world by acting directly on it. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han explores how technology impacts our hands in his book, In the Swarm. Digital technology, he says, is making human hands waste away, as humans deal less with thingly things and more with unthingly information. And anyone who shakes hands with a middle-aged tradesman and then a millennial techie experiences firsthand exactly what Han is getting at. And Han says, the new man fingers instead of handles. Han points out that the Latin etymology of digital is digitus, meaning finger. Thus we've arrived at digital man, homo digitalis, man fingerer. So much for thinking man, working man. Now we have fingering man. Fingering versus handling is a thought-provoking juxtaposition. In the digital world, you click, you get, you swipe, you see. No labor nor friction, no resistance nor weight. Hands formed of screen swiping and button pushing are quite different than the hands formed of the clash of shovel with dirt, the heft of brick and mortar, the precision of needle and thread, and the kneading of dough into bread. In contrast, Han says, digital man fingers the world. Of course, by fingering, Han doesn't mean the precise fingering techniques of a musician or someone who uses their dexterity to accomplish a task. He means instead the slick swiping and smooth sliding that has overtaken the daily movements of our hands in relation to screens. A fingering that requires actually no mechanical engagement or confrontation with reality in any way. In the digital world, pushing a button is not really pushing anything at all. A flat, near frictionless screen sends its finger over a certain location and then executes that associated digital program script. Indeed, a marvel of human ingenuity, and it's been one of the allures of the smartphone from the beginning. No buttons. But Han wonders what happens to humans as this digital way of interacting with the world extends further and further. And if it's true that the average smartphone owner will click, tap, or swipe their phone 2,617 times a day, Han may have a point. Which brings me to my point in this presentation. Incorporating the common arts into our schools, homeschools, or churches, where our hands can find a purpose in forming and shaping in accord with truth, goodness, and beauty. As our hands are united with our hearts and our minds, as we're formed and shaped in wisdom and virtue. So I wanted to use that sort of to launch into our discussion of the common arts, the use of the hands in this digital world that we live in, and their necessity, and I'll argue for their use as a supplement, really, to the classical curriculum. So what are the common arts? Let's get into the outline now. What are the common arts? Could someone read the definition there for us under Roman numeral 1.a? Just go ahead and start reading some of it. Pastor Thompson, thanks.
The common arts are the skills that provide for basic embodied human needs through the creation of artifacts or the provision of services. These servile arts stand in contrast to the liberal arts, but they are not mutually exclusive. The common arts offer a clear path by which the liberal arts become manifest in the world as they serve as natural vehicles for the practice of the arts of language, mathematics, and the embodiment of virtue.
Thanks, sir. The definition I'm working with is coming from Christopher Hall, Common Arts Education, a book published with Classical Academic Press a few years ago. So there is a distinction between the common arts and the liberal arts. That's just something we all need to acknowledge, right? This is not part of the liberal arts, historically speaking. They are skills that provide for basic embodied human needs. So in that sense, they are very practical, right? And that may cause us to grate a little bit. But as we go along, you'll see where the argument, I think, starts to come together. So that's the definition we're working with. Common arts are skills that provide for basic embodied human needs through the creation of artifacts or the provision of services. Now, the relation to other arts. First off, just a classical definition of art from Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics. Art is making that is accompanied by true reason. And in that sense, the Greeks are categorizing many things as arts, right? In Greek, art is usually coming from the word techne, which in Greek can have a variety of meanings, meaning skill, tool, technique, art, craft, right? There's all sorts of senses in the word in which the word techne can be used. So this sentence here, there's a lot in this from Aristotle. So first off, art, techne, is making, poiesis, okay, which is where we get the word poetry or poetic, right? This sort of creative task of the human being. And then it's accompanied by true reason, and the word there that Aristotle uses is, guess what? Logos, which is also really interesting. So in that little short sentence of Aristotle, you got a lot going on. You've got techne, you've got poiesis, and you've got logos. So any making that is accompanied by true reason. So in that sense, again, we have a very broad definition of arts that then the common arts would fit under. Can somebody read the next quote for us there, please? This is a quote from Gene Bede's Statement of the Arts, one of his earlier books.
For the ancients, in the exercise of human creativity, building ships, making shoes, healing the sick, governing the state, is described as art. All honest occupations involve art. The God-given capacity of human beings to make things is at the essence of art. A carpenter building a house is, in this sense, just as much an artist as the painter. Both use their talents, their minds, and their skill with their hands to make something valuable. Consider art is to contemplate human creativity in all its forms.
Great, thank you, John. So there again, we see this broader concept of art, right? Any exercise of human creativity. Now, there's another interesting aspect of art in the ancient world, and really all the way up until the Enlightenment, Beeth argues. So somebody read the next quote for us there.
The ancient Hebrews, the Greeks, the medieval craftsmen, the Renaissance painters, or the tribes of Africa or South America did not have museums. Art was integrated with life. Today, the segregation of art from life results in the impoverishment of both art, which has become abstrusely theoretical and elitist, and ordinary life, which has increasingly fallen prey to the ugly and the tasteless.
Thank you, Jeff. So there we have this concept of a separation in the modern world between art and everything else, right? Beeth talks about the segregation of art from life. And there's negative consequences of that, right? The way we think about art, and the way we think about our everyday life. So those are sort of some concepts I just want you to have in your mind as we go through the session here. Definition of common arts, and then a broader understanding of art in general that we're working with. Any questions or comments on the first sort of definitional task here as we're going along? Good? Yeah.
May I share a life experience?
Sure.
Okay. I'm not an educator, I'm not involved in education, but I work in the trades.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to see the classical model leaning towards the trades in a sense also. Mm-hmm. And Beeth's first statement there that you used, I worked in the plumbing trade, the HVAC trades, things like that. And that trade is also going down that road of being easier and easier to do. They're cutting out soldering,
sure,
with PEX piping,
yeah,
clips, and everything. And it's just like, I looked at that as my own personal part of working in that field. And to hear that and read that and see that.
It's very affirming, right? It gets us away from that concept of like sort of blue collar, white collar, right? The sort of degradation of the manual trades that we've really dealt with in the last 100 years, right? The sort of smart kid track at school and then the low-tech track, right? All of those things I think are really unhelpful and unhealthy in the way we think about intellectual tasks and then physical tasks, as if physical tasks don't require intellectual abilities, right? Think of all the intellectual work that also goes into your plumbing, right, into your HVAC. You have to have a knowledge of all sorts of materials, right? You have the knowledge of physics and how water works, right? All sorts of things are going into play in any trade that are actually quite intellectual, right? And those intellectual skills that are being manifest in the world and expressed through our hands and through what we make, right? What we prepare. Good. Anything else as we move into part 2 there? Yes, sir.
Not to detract from anything you said,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this is your first block here, it's the common arts offer a clear path by which liberal arts will manifest. I was thinking about what Luther says about the purpose of the schools and the liberal arts in the schools, particularly being the production of pastors and leaders of government, right? And so I'm wondering how do those go together? Is there a contradiction there?
Yeah, I think we'll flesh that out a little bit more in part 3, do the common arts fit with classical education? It's a very valid question, and what I'm really arguing here is a pretty modest argument, okay? I'm not saying you want to change the curriculum to put common arts in it. I do think we should think of it as a supplement and support. That's really my main point here today. It's not to make an argument that is central to it, or that I'm sort of rewriting the whole history of classical education to say it was there, right? Because there's some inherent tension, especially in the Greek view. But I think when we get to part 3, we'll address that a little bit. If I don't, come back to it at the end. It's a good question. So why do we need the common arts? First off, we're embodied creatures, right? We have been given a body, right? This is just Christian anthropology, right? Starting from the concept of the goodness of the body, the creation of the body by God, right? The unity of the human person, of mind and body, or soul and body, right? All of those things are very important when we think about why we need to use our bodies, right? Question for you: was there work before the fall? Yes, there was, right? There wasn't the toil and the sweat, right, and the futility, but there was work to do, right? And I think that's very suggestive as well of the importance of craft and what we call common arts. For virtue formation in mind, body, and soul, right? So when we think about classical education, we frequently talk about mind and body, right, and soul as categories, intellectual, moral, and physical. And this is a way maybe to fill out that picture, right? To have a holistic, completely holistic view of the human person, not just as a soul and a mind, right, but also a body. And physical education would be part of that as well, the physical arts, as we heard earlier today. I'm not going to do any fancy push-ups or sit-ups or anything. You do it in that one. You got quite a display of physical fitness, so it was great. So virtue formation. I think the common arts can be a big part of that. And I have a quote there from St. Ignatius, one of the early church fathers: "Bring up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and teach them the Holy Scriptures, and also trades, that they may not indulge in idleness." Right? So this was something that was important to early church fathers. Paul talks about this in a similar way in his writings to the church at Thessalonica, where he tells them not to be idle with their hands. Right? He himself was a tent maker, in addition, obviously, to his work as pastor and preacher and so forth. So we have some precedent there, if you will, for valuing these things as an important part of virtue formation. I'd say we also need the common arts for the development of what Albert Borgmann calls focal practices. Focal practices. And focal practices center and illuminate our lives because they are activities that engage us with the world and with each other, requiring the exercise and development of skill and our full attention and presence in real time and space with real things and real people. Borgmann was writing this in the 80s in a great book called Technology and the Character of Contemporary Life. And already in the 80s, he was foreseeing what he called the device paradigm, okay? Where everything is sort of mediated to us through technological layers, right? And the classic example he gives is of heating your home under the device paradigm. And to heat your home under the device paradigm, what do you do? What do you do to heat your home? Cool your home.
You set your app.
Right. You go to the thermostat, or you don't have to do that now, right? You just use your phone, you adjust those temps, and what happens?
You program it.
Right? It's done. It works. Until it doesn't, then we call you up, right? But there's a huge distance, right, between you and the actual mechanical work that's occurring, right? It's going through wireless networks to send the message to the device on the wall, which then sends it through the wires to the machine, right? The machine is connected to the electrical grid, right? Which somewhere is producing energy far away from your house. You're not seeing all of that go on, right? 500 years ago, how did you heat your home?
Wood.
Right. You know where we're going here, right? You chop the wood, start the fire, put it in the stove, whatever, right? So there was a much more direct involvement with the task of heating your home. Right? That's his sort of paradigm for the device paradigm. That's his classic example he gives. And he argues that that's the way everything's going, right? There's so many layers between us and the actual task being completed that it does something to us, right? So he encourages as a way to fight against that device paradigm to develop focal practices, right? To participate in an art or a craft or something that requires you to directly engage with the physical world, right? So what would be some examples of focal practices? Furnishing. Gardening. Cooking.
Painting.
Right.
Painting.
Painting. Crocheting. You get it. Any of the crafts, if you will, right? Or things that are involving your hands and actually producing something tangible, okay? And he has several reasons for this, why it's so important. I'm just going to summarize this because that would sort of be a completely separate presentation, but attention is one of them, right? Attention and attunement, he talks about. Attunement with this close focus on what you're doing. Cal Newport calls it maybe deep work, right? Maybe another way to think about it. Harmon Rosen calls it resonance. There's this flow or resonance, right? Not to get all woo-woo on you, but there's something that happens when you're involved in a task where you're deeply engaged with it, right? You've experienced this if you exercise maybe, or if you're involved in a craft, right? You get into that state, right? Or the athletes call about being in the zone, right? There's something that happens that is this sort of deep resonance with what you're doing, with your own body and the world around you. And Borgman says that's very important to have ways to recover that. I'd also say focal practices are important because you have to submit yourself to the rules of that craft, right? Great example is music. This is also one of the examples he uses in the book, right? To be good at music, you have to submit yourself to the discipline of time signatures, scales, right? Musical notation, hours of practice, right? All of those things that then build your skills so that then you can flourish at making good music. Right? The jazz musician who's improvising is not just starting at that point, right? That's after years and years of training, right? Going through, if you will, the grammar of music, right? Following the logic or rules of music to the point where he can do the rhetoric of music, if you want to think about it that way, right? Where he can actually freely express himself within the rules of the discipline, right? And that's actually empowering. It's freedom through submission. You submit yourself to the rules of whatever the discipline is, or whatever the material is, and you actually find a deep sense of freedom in that, right? One of the ways I generate income for my family is making furniture. And I have to submit myself to the wood, if you will, right? I have to go with the brick, okay? There's certain rules and principles I have to follow. Same thing with crochet or cooking. You know what I'm talking about, right? So I don't want to belabor the point, but focal practices are really important to recover in our times and place. And then lastly, so we can be makers, not takers. This is something I developed in a piece not too long ago for an interesting group of folks. They call themselves the Savage Collective. They're a group of sort of tradesmen and professors that are working together to try to combine the liberal arts and the common arts. And I think a big part of our problem is our society is such a consumer society, right? We consume everything. We don't make much anymore. And our homes, if you think about it, have really become like hotels. We just sort of sleep there. We don't view the home as a place of fruitfulness and generativity and creativity, right? In the way it used to be, in the sense of the household, the original economy, right? That word comes from what two words? Economy comes from oikos, which means family or household, right? And nomos, law or rule. So even the word that we use to refer to GDP and massive budgets and all of that actually originally came about from this idea of the household rule, right? The household law, which was a place of productivity and creativity. Okay, questions on part 2? Okay, let's roll into part 3. Do the common arts fit with classical education? There is an inherent intention in what I'm proposing here and what Christopher Hall is proposing. And I already sort of touched on that. Somebody fleshed that out a little bit more. What is the tension in what I'm proposing here? What would the Greeks say to do the common arts fit with classical education? We'll start with, you got an answer. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say,
We usually associate the liberal arts as something that isn't necessarily applicable to a particular thing. It's not like, it doesn't have an immediate application. It's very broad and can be applied generally, and it's connected to so many things. But whereas a servile art is connected to pretty much a single thing. You're learning a set of skills to apply it in this situation.
Yeah, very good. What else? Pragmatic, right? Utilitarian. These are very practical, oriented things, right? What did the Greeks say about the servile arts? Use that.
For the slave.
Yeah, exactly. For the slave, right? What were you going to say? Same thing. Yeah. Servile arts. They were also called vulgar arts. Right? So there was a clear distinction in the Greek mind between the liberal arts, right, and the servile arts. And the idea of the liberal arts was that you were a free person, right? You were able to spend your time on things that weren't practical and utilitarian and for making money. The Greeks connected the servile arts to making money, as we frequently do today as well, right? We do them very pragmatically or in a utilitarian fashion. So that's obviously I'm condensing a lot, right? We're just going to jump historically, sort of a whirlwind tour. But there's very much a tension in the Greek mind between these two things, liberal arts and servile arts. But if we go to the Middle Ages, we start to see a little bit of a shift. And I think the reason why is because the Greeks in general have a sort of disdain for the body in a certain way, an antipathy to physicality. If you think of Plato, right, the body is a prison house of the soul. That's not a Christian view of the body, right? And so I think part of the reason, this is a tentative thesis, right? I know it would require a lot more argumentation and research. Maybe some of you can help me with that. Or if you think I'm wrong, let me know here. But I think that's part of the reason that there was that tension between the two in their mind, is because there was a negative view of the body in perhaps a way that Christians wouldn't hold. Even if you think of like the Greek myths, work is usually a punishment. I'm not an expert in Greek myths, and I don't want to be accused of being Woodrow Wilson, as read about Henry Cabot Lodge, but I do think in general that there's a negative view of work, right? Again, the servile arts are associated with the slave, right, not the free person. So there's a tension there that is real. But in the medieval era, with folks like Hugh of St. Victor, the common arts start to be recategorized. They start to be understood in a different way. And if you think about what goes on at a place like St. Victor or other monasteries or universities of that era, right, what do the monks do? Yeah, they're praying, they're doing the work of the mind and the soul and also the body, right? What was St. Benedict's max? Right, ora et ora, right? Pray and work. So I think we see a little bit of a shift there, and I would argue that that's because Christians have a different view of the body, where these things aren't just, servile or vulgar things, but they're actually something that can become holy, right? It can be part of your calling. It can be valuable. We could maybe look at the Renaissance as well, right? Think of some of the great Renaissance men of that era, or the artists, like Da Vinci. Did he have to be pretty good with the common arts? Yeah. Or Michelangelo, right? To be able to sculpt, you have to master that common art, right? So there's definitely, I think, a bit of a shift in the valuing of the common arts at that point. Fast forwarding again here a little bit, we go to the founding era. Who was Jefferson's ideal citizen?
Farmer.
The farmer citizen, right? Who was a combination of those things together. And do you think a lot of the founders, they were in their own persons that, right? Jefferson was certainly a scholar, but he also made wine and did woodworking, right? Think of the versatility of the men of the founding era, right? That are putting those things together, I think, in a pretty interesting way. So that's obviously very condensed, but I think we do see a bit of a shift in the view of the common arts. Again, I'm not arguing that they're central to the classical education curriculum. I'm making a modest argument here that I think they can have a place as a supplement or a complement, and I think that fits with our Christian view of a person. Let's see, if anything else on the historical, I know this is, again, super quick, but anything you want to add or push back on, please. I love it when people do that.
Correlation between the guilds and the university system. Weren't they all at the same time?
Yeah, that's a good point too, the guild system. I've not done much research into that to have any insight.
You have your apprentices, your masters. You have the students, just like the universities where you have your graduates and your, it was all about the same time period, it seems like.
Yeah, that'd be definitely worth exploring for sure. Yeah.
There was diversity within the Greek academic canon. Aristotle, remember, in his Nicomachean, it was in his Metaphysics, just talked about substance and the form, contradicting Plato, that substance exists, or the forms exist within substance.
That's right.
Also remember, Epictetus, the Greeks worked out, the gymnasium, they trained their bodies.
Yes, for sure.
As one of our previous presenters.
That's right, yeah. The physical fitness aspect of Greek education was certainly primary, or not primary, but definitely together. But there was still that, I think, a distinction with the servile arts, right? And maybe that's also because they were, again, connected to the slave. But yeah, the physical arts were a way to manifest beauty in your own body, right, in a certain sense. And maybe we might say the common arts are a way to manifest beauty, truth, and goodness in physical things. Yeah.
You know, with this discussion, I'm reminded of the building of the temple.
Yeah. Right. A holy abbot Bezalel, right? Given skills by God, right? So there you certainly see a redeeming, if you will, of the common arts, and I would say of technology in general. In early Genesis, you see technology usually associated with the line of Cain. But we see a shift with the temple, and then God sort of redeeming those technologies until they culminate in the holy city, right? Which would certainly require the common arts to be made, right? Yeah. So there's definitely biblical passages we could go to as well to see the value of these things. Maybe to get back to your question, Daniel, maybe this is where the Lutheran concept of vocation also plays a pretty big role when we think about the purpose of education, right? The doctrine of vocation and the two kingdoms really is central in our understanding. We're not just doing this for the sake of developing the mind, but also serving neighbor. And serving neighbor requires us to prepare pastors. It also requires us to prepare tradesmen, right? Things of that nature. So that might be another way to crack that nut. Okay, modern trends. I'm just going to highlight a few things here. Again, there'd be so much to say about modern trends and how we think about the trades or vo-tech or all of those things. I'm going to just highlight some things really in the last 100 years. So you might remember home ec and shop class, right? Depending on how old you are, right? Now those have a fascinating history, and I've developed this in a few places in article form, but at first, home ec was actually viewed by the feminists as a very good thing because it was viewed as sort of a professionalization of the homemaker task, right? And that was the era where we wanted to professionalize everything, right? That you have to sort of get trained in this to do it well. So it was seen as a valuing of the household arts. But then it became a feminist pariah in the 50s and 60s with books like The Feminine Mystique and so forth, when the household really is shifting from being a place of productivity and generativity to a place of basically where things are done for you by appliances, right? So there's all these changes that are taking place in society and the workplace that are changing the way we think about the home, which impacts then what we think about what's done in the home, right? So home ec has an interesting history, and shop class sort of mirrors that to a certain degree. Now, if you think about that, though, that's even a very modern conception to begin with, because originally these things would have been taught in the household, right? There's a reason they were also called the household arts in many cases, right? And this is where I think sometimes when we think about traditional roles, and I know I'm going down a tangent here, but I want to say this and I'll family. Sometimes when you think about traditional roles or the traditional home or the traditional family, we're thinking of the 1950s. Okay? Is that really the traditional family? No, if you have to go much further back, right? Where the household was, again, a central unit of making and creating and generating, and it was a place where husband and wife were spending much more time with their children, right? This is something that I think, again, we just need to be careful when we're thinking about what we mean by traditional roles for men and women or the home, right? I think it's important to go back past the 1950s because that was very much an industrial concept of what the home is and what the family is, right? Okay, so home ec and shop class, last 100 years, they sort of go in this up and down pattern until many schools completely do away with them. But that's important to note that those things really were originally developed in a home. Let's see here, what else I want to say here. There's very much a pragmatic or utilitarian understanding of the trades and skills today, right, for the purpose of making money. I already mentioned earlier the concept of blue collar, white collar, right, or being tracked sort of in a vo-tech track or a college prep track. I think those things have been largely unhealthy and unhelpful to the way we think about ways to generate income or ways to have a meaningful life. If you want to read more about that, probably the best book is still this classic here by Matthew Crawford, Shop Classes Soulcraft. He was a knowledge worker, to use the modern term, in Washington, D.C. He worked at a lot of think tanks and sort of in the bowels of bureaucracy, and eventually he sort of cashed it all in and became a mechanic. And he documents that and sort of tells the story in here. Fascinating story that I think really resonates with a lot of principles of classical education. He wrote a book a few years later called The World Beyond Your Head, on becoming an individual in the age of distraction, where he sort of traces these themes further. These are very good books to sort of get a big picture view on why these things matter. And he actually recently converted to Christianity. I always thought his writing was like right on the cusp, but he's one of these contemporary intellectuals that's been on a journey to Christianity, which is very cool. Thanks be to God. Let's see here, what else modern trends? I don't know, I'm going all over the place. What do you want to say about modern trends when you think about trades or skills, things like that? Yeah.
Would you say now that common arts are leaning more towards leisure? Like, the dad who has time to have the right tools to go in the garage and woodwork with his son, but instead of going to Walmart for $20 and buying the end table.
Sure, that's a good point. And I do think if we're going to incorporate them, we need to frame them in the concept of leisure to a certain degree, that it's more than just about making money, although it may help you with that. There is a bigger reason.
Well, leisure in a good sense.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. No, I know. I've got it right here. Yeah. Actually, I read it on the drive up here, not while I was driving. Just because this, again, I think this is where the tension lies, right? You've got the whole argument that we're sort of developing in the classical world is that we need to get away from utilitarian, pragmatic concepts of education, right? We need to focus more on the schole, the leisure, education for education's sake, right? Not for some other end, as Pieper argues that that's the whole idea of the liberal arts. They're an end in themselves, right? There's not a practical end to them per se. So I wanted to reread this to see how what I'm saying fits with Pieper. And I acknowledge there is somewhat of a tension there. Although he has a quote in there from Cardinal Newman. Let me see if I can just find it. I think it was... Okay. So he's talking about the difference between the liberal arts and the servile arts, but then he quotes Newman. Newman says, that knowledge may resolve itself into an art and seminate in a mechanical process and in tangible fruit. But it may also fall back upon that reason which informs it and resolve itself into philosophy. For in one case it is called useful knowledge, in the other liberal. now I should have had that on the paper because there's a lot going on there, but there is something that Newman is doing that is a little different, again, from the Greek view, right? That in some ways the common arts are an expression of the liberal arts in the real world, perhaps, right? Or an expression or manifestation of the transcendentals. Might be a way to think of the medieval cathedral. That is a beautiful expression, right, of the transcendentals in actual concrete form. And that required the common arts to be made. Because maybe at their best, the common arts are imitating, right, are imitative in their nature. Imitating, pointing towards what we see in nature and what we ultimately see in the transcendentals. That might be a way to think about it as well. But yeah, I see your point that many of these things are able to be done in the concept, within that framework of leisure. I think that's important, to see them more as job training or something like that. But part of expressing our humanity in tangible, concrete things, right? Okay, let's keep going. Good question. Anything else there? Yeah.
I'm thinking about Marxism, communism, and workers of the world unite. And I'm just thinking out loud here. It's almost like under that system, that worldview, the liberal arts were pushed down, and the common arts are pushed up. The common arts are used in the service of the state rather than for the good of the individual or the family, etc.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that in connection with what you're talking about here?
No, I think that's a really good point. And Pieper makes the point in his book frequently about totalitarianism and communism. Right? He's writing in the post-World War II era where these other systems are growing and this concept of total work really taking over both America and communist regimes. So I think what you're saying is important there, that we're not putting these forward, how did you put it? It was good.
Well, the liberal arts are kind of squashed to a large degree, and the common arts are lifted up, but they're lifted up in the service of the state.
Right. Yeah, and I think we should view them as a way to be a liberated person, to be a free person. Perhaps in a way that wasn't the case earlier on in the history of the world, where we weren't consumers in the way we are today, right? When are you actually more free? When you know how to maybe repair some things around your house, or when you have to pay somebody to do it all the time for you, right? You might be a little more free if you had some of those skills yourself, right? Now, obviously, I'm not talking down about vocation, right, and the importance of recognizing vocation. If I'm not good at fixing my car, I shouldn't try. I'm just going to waste my time and get frustrated. I should hire the guy that it's the vocation to do so. But do you see my point? There's something about our society where actually being a truly free person, we might actually be able to be more free by recovering some of these things that just were built into the warp and woof of prior eras, right? Because of the household, because of the encounters with real things that people had. Just think about the way that we encounter the weather compared to the way like a medieval person encountered the weather. Right? We have all these ways to buffer the effects of the weather, right? In ways that make it even possible for us to think that maybe we have more control than we do. The medieval person had no way to buffer the effects of the weather in the same way we do. And that gave them a sense of their limits, maybe a sense also of their creatureliness, very important word, right? So yeah, I think that's important to think about there as well. Okay, quote from the Common Arts. It's hard, this is exactly where we're going. All right, man, here's just read the quote. It is hard to be free when one lacks skills necessary to survival and must rely upon artificial structures of business to provide for all basic needs. Rediscovering these arts not only realigns skills of head, heart, and hand, but also points us to the interconnectedness of the liberal, fine, and common arts. The liberal arts lead the way in classical education, but the fine and common arts express, make manifest, and support the goals inherent in the practice of the liberal arts. I think this is Christopher Hall from his book. I think it's a valid point, right? In this very sort of consumeristic society, we actually might be more free if we reclaim some of these things. And perhaps we all encountered that to a certain degree during COVID, right, where all the supply chains and all that type of stuff, we were sort of captured to a certain degree And we see it anytime there's a barge that gets stuck in one of the canals in the Middle East, right? Everything stops because of these huge supply chains that are all very fragile, right? So this might be a way to recover a sense of our freedom. Next quote there from Christopher Hall. Someone read that one for us, please.
As you trace the arts of language and mathematics forward, you end up coming to a point where they need to become manifest in embodied ways, as the common arts. Trace the common arts back around, and you realize at a point that without the guidance and orientation of the liberal arts, they never break out of their utilitarian confines or purposes. With the two in concert, we can trace the art of a holistic education, while the liberal arts provide the foundational elements of an education for rightly ordered freedom, and they lay the cornerstones for all further inquiry. The common arts provide practical, artisanal elements of a holistic education. They are separate and distinct in terms of the specific skills they cultivate in us, and yet they have apprenticeship and virtue formation in common. They reflect facets of the same logos and orient us all toward the same beatific vision.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good way to summarize what the case is here. Again, it's a modest case, it's a modest argument, that the common arts are a way to sort of express and manifest the classical curriculum in the real world, and it's all pointing to the same beatific vision. That's, again, I think the main source, if you want to read more about this, is probably Christopher Hall currently. I will say the most recent edition of this book has a lengthier explanation of the common arts, which I think is also suggestive, right, that they're expanding their portion about the common arts in here. So, any questions before we move on to what this actually looks like in practice? There's a lot of things out there. Appreciate your patience and attention. Again, this could be developed much more in depth, right, with quotations and sources and all that, to really substantiate this and make a more precise case. What I'm trying to do is, again, just make a suggestive, modest argument here today. Okay, so what does this actually look like? I'm going to talk about some things I've done and my wife has done at our church, and at our school, and at our home. I'm going to pass around a few packets. They're all the same. I'll just put them on. Let's see, I'll do these two this way, and I'll do the other two the other way. In here, you're going to see some pictures of different programs, workshops, and things we've tried to incorporate the common arts. And then I also want to hear from, let's see, did I do this? I think that's the right one. Okay. Just pass it along and take a look at it. I wanted to print out a bunch, and I didn't really want to use PowerPoint. So what we've done in our community is we've hosted both summer camps to teach the common arts, and we've also done one-day workshops, both on our property. We have 5 acres, and I have a workshop where I do my furniture making. So there's room for kids to play, and there's the facility to do woodworking, and then also to do home ec in the kitchen. We can handle 20 at a time, basically 10 in the kitchen, 10 in the shop. So we've done summer camps for 3 years. Those are exhausting. I used to do summer camps all summer, sports camps and outdoor camps. I guess I'm just getting old. And I must be getting old because 5 people didn't recognize me this week from last year, so I guess I ate a lot.
It's funny, you got a different shirt on now.
Yeah. So, all the camps are great. They're very popular, right? Those things are exploding. But it's a lot of time and effort. It can be exhausting, especially if you're getting old. Maybe that's where the young kids should do that. But the summer camps, basically, they were day camps. And we had a session in the morning in the shop for 10 kids, a session in the kitchen for 10 kids. Then we had some free time, we had lunch, and then we swapped in the afternoon. Then we had some more free time, and then the kids went home, we did it all week. And then we finished out the week with a family cookout, where the kids could show what they made, or you could take their parents into the shop. Oh, I use this tool, I use that tool. And we just hung out as families. It was really fun. We did that through, some church families came, some of our classical co-op families came, some from the community came. Very successful, but again, we're exhausting. So we shifted the last year or two because of our commitments, we've expanded to one-day workshops. And these are a little easier to pull off, obviously. We've still primarily done home ec and shop because that's my wife and I's sort of wheelhouse. And I think those are very basic things that are important for people to start to get a taste for craft. And those have been themed. We've done some themes around, Christmas, right? Come and make some, Christmas presents in the shop and make some Christmas cookies to give away, that type of thing. We've also themed some around the curriculum. Many classical curriculums in the early years sort of go through a cycle of history where you do ancient, medieval, and American, right? So we themed some of the projects around that, especially the cooking. So we did a series of workshops, one-day workshops where they were cooking medieval food. Which went with the medieval curriculum that they've been learning about. We did one for ancient. We did one for American history. And we did those on like 1 day a week for a month, right? So they could make 4 different dishes that were themed around those things. Those are very popular and very tasty. We also tried this last year. We're in the process of launching school in the fall of 2026 at our church. We've been doing a pilot preschool co-op this year. Past year, this coming year, so we're ready to launch that. And we've been trying to do some supplementary things for the congregation along the way. So this year we did a workshop leading up to Lent. We did a Lenten workshop where we made a Lenten cross, which is basically like an Advent wreath for Lent. Okay? You start with 6 candles lit on the cross, and you extinguish one each week until you get Holy Week, and they're all out, and then you blow them back up on Easter, right? You light them all back up, and then light them for the Easter season. The kids really enjoyed that. It's I gave kids saws and chisels, okay, that were actually sharp, and they didn't cut themselves. I was the only one that cut myself.
What is your age on that?
Good question. So they could come with a parent if they were 5 to 8, I believe it was. I think it's in the packets, the specific ages. And I'd be happy to email specifics, but I think that was what it is. If they were 5 to 8, you could come with a parent. 8 to 12, or maybe 8 to 14. They could just come on themselves. But we also encourage families to stay, and a lot of them did. If they were interested and they wanted help. I think that's another important aspect of this, is to incorporate the families, right? So that then they can learn as well to do some of these things in their homes. So we made the Lenten cross, and we made hot cross buns in the kitchen. And we basically converted the parish hall into a shop, and then the kitchen and the church, obviously, the kitchen. And that worked great. We used all hand tools. All they needed to do was saw some straight lines and use a drill, of course, for a bit, and then tack some nails for the corpus, for the crucifix. And we got that done. And this was an event that went from 10 to 3. So they made, within a couple hours, they made that take-home item that's actually valuable. I mean, you can buy them online for, I don't know, $30, $40, and they actually made it, right? And so many of the families sent me pictures during Lent with their kids around the candles at the table and doing the devotions. It was so sweet. And then obviously the hot cross buns are consumables, but real things to take home. And a lot of them also, they said later that month, their kids said, hey, I want to make hot cross buns. And guess what they were on? The recipe. So then they made it with their parents, and they ate it and enjoyed it, right? So those are some ways we've done it. We're going to try to incorporate it in some way to our school. Our school is still forming, so I don't know what that will look like. At the beginning, we're going to continue doing this twice a year. We're going to do workshops at church for kids twice a year. The next one we're going to do is going to be related to Candlemas. We're going to take the leftovers of the eternity candles. We're going to melt them down. We're going to make candles for them to take home. And then there's a food associated with Candlemas. I believe it's grapes. And we're going to make crepes and so forth. A great way to connect things to the church year as well. I think it's really important, this type of thing. And there's tons of ideas from all the household on that. So, yeah. Candlemas. Yes. One of the pastors, fill me in. Give me a brief description of Candlemas. Who wants to do it?
Nancy. 40 days after Christ's ordinary purified the temple, February 2nd. And so that is the day in which candles are typically dedicated in the church. In England, it was called Candlemas.
And it's like Groundhog's Day.
It's also
because if the flames like move, it's
England, that's the day you took your Christmas tree.
It's drafty.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, those are just some ways we try to, and this, workshop model is very flexible. You can plug in any two things you want, right? Depending on your congregation. Maybe you've got a mechanic. He come in and show kids how to change a tire and fix a lawnmower. In the afternoon, maybe you have somebody who's great with sewing. You can do something sewing. You see what I'm saying? This is like a pilot that you could make your own in so many ways. And I think that the shortness of the workshop model is also nice, right? It's a one-day thing, and you could do it, of course, if you want to do a more substantial skill set, you could expand it. And that's why we did sometimes Fridays for a month, right? The downside is you can't really do a lot of skill training in that time. It has to be a pretty accessible project, like an entry-level project. And that's where maybe you could, over time, incorporate a more substantial curriculum in your school if you wanted to on some of these things. But at the very least, I think exposure is at least a starting point here. I have a couple examples of places that I think are doing this well. St. Dunstan's Academy in Virginia. This is an Anglican classical school that is really drilling deep into the common arts to the point where they're actually building their own school. The boys are building it. One of the headmasters has a commercial construction license, so they're building timber frame buildings where the school is going to be housed. Obviously, we're not going to all be able to do that. He's also been making the arguments in First Things and in Touchstone and other publications. I have the footnote down there, Mark Perkins. He's been advancing this argument that these things, again, can supplement each other and complement each other. There's a college in Steubenville, Ohio, fascinating place, sort of a parish-centered college that's emerging called the College of St. Joseph the Worker. It's a liberal arts trade school hybrid with the goal of students will graduate with a Catholic liberal arts education as well as a solid foundation in one of several skilled trades, which enables them to be faithful Christians who are virtuous citizens, intellectually formed and capable of building up the church in their communities. I'm on their mailing list. They're definitely making progress. They've opened, they have students, they're building facilities. It's a pretty neat project. One of their taglines is, "And the Word became flesh and picked up a hammer." I think it's actually a riff on, I think, John Paul II's theology of the body, but it's a pretty effective sort of line, right? There's also some efforts with LCC. They're exploring relationships with the Lutheran Institute for Regenerative Agriculture. Lyra's had some sort of things that have slowed them down a little bit, they're on hold in a few ways, but those two institutions or organizations are exploring ways that they could work together. And in here, those who know about this classical college, you could chime in at this point. I did check with Ryan McPherson ahead of time to make sure what I was saying was correct, and he was comfortable with that sentence. But I think that, again, is showing that there's this interest in connecting these dots. They also have a relationship with a trade school that's close to Lyra, where the 2-year track that LCC offers can sort of then segue into the trade school that's near where Lyra is. And at this point, I wanted to hear from you all. What are you all doing? What's working well? I want to hear ideas. Yeah.
I don't know where to start. I need to start with you. I would actively, for all of us in the classical world, to strike the word modest in terms of the proposal for classical art. Architecture desperately needs our holistic philosophy.
Yeah.
We're walking into buildings that are literally painful.
Yeah.
That when he was talking about the worker working for the system, yes, that is a type of architecture called brutalism.
Sure.
And it's got a thing, and then as opposed to that other discussion of the building of your own, that's another type of architecture called vernacular. And so people like being in the vernacular style so much so that Chuck and Joanna have we got shiplap all over the place. So you can buy a shiplap table or whatever. So so I just think it's such a big deal that we consider the extension of this into architecture through these survival arts. And there's one classical architecture school. There's Notre Dame. Everything else is going to be some really poisonous philosophies that, unless our students are willing to defend against, to
Is Isaac in here? From Brown? Okay, if you want to, oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So we started at high school 2 years ago.
Yes.
We got home ec, we got wood shop, and we
Yes.
started auto mechanics.
Yes, thank you.
It's all very, it's easy because there's not that many people. We live right by the church, and then my husband does
Yeah.
work, so they walk to my house and
Yeah.
go to the shop.
Thanks, Alvin. So there's an example of a school that's incorporating this at the high school level, and this is the last one.
I just want to say I'm very grateful for fathers who teach their sons stuff, and for mothers who teach their daughters stuff. I'm
Yeah.
personally grateful for, and it's so important, personally grateful for my dad who taught me how to hunt, how to butcher, how to, a little bit about animal husbandry, and a little bit about construction enough so that you can get by. And my wife, who is a very, very good seamstress, and these are skills that I will pass on to my children because of how valuable they are and of how free they keep me from relying on a system that could fail at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end with, right? This connects to the home and to the family and the vocation that we all have in the home, right? Thank you for your time. If you want to look at any of the books I talked about, about this at your school, email me. I want to hear about what you're doing, what's working, so I can learn from that.
Yeah.
And shameless book plug, sorry. I wrote a book that has something to do with this called Are We All Sidewalk Now? My Life in the Digital Age. That's a little bit about the common arts. And then I've got a new book coming out this fall called Education's End, which has quite a bit about the household and the common arts and also all sorts of other things. If you're interested about when that comes out, put your email on here on your way out, and I will send you an email when that book comes out. Thanks so much for your time. Blessings on your good phone.